the second day of our Congregational Preaching Workshop Seminar. Today, Aniruddha Das from Melbourne is going to give a talk on the temple managing a congregational preaching program. From his experience in Melbourne, he's got a very developed congregational preaching program there. This is a temple. We all know that in ISKCON, Prabhupada has made the temple a basic structure. And these green lines are supposed to indicate the distance from a particular temple. Now in a temple we have your regular programs, we have our deities and everything. So there's a certain area that people can come to the temple every day or every week. In traveling time, what do you think that area would be? 1 hour? Maximum. I got an assistant here. Hold it. Haribo, Doro. So we have, within a 1 hour journey, you can have people directly on a daily, weekly basis getting their programs from the temple. Here's like your immediate temple congregation. You can see that that is a little bit limited in how much you can serve. Now, there's another little wider circle here. That's where they can come occasionally to the temple. They can occasionally come by driving, maybe once a month. Maybe some people really fired up can come once a week. Or at least they can come on Janmastamis, on big festival days. It's not that big a festival, but just like even if they want to, they could come, but not on a daily basis, but occasionally they can come. How much, what travel time you give that? 2 or 3 hours? 3 or 4 hours? Okay. 3 to... What we got here, somewhere between 2, 3 to 4. It depends, I guess, how rough traveling is. Okay, beyond that, you have an area which is the temple's area. Whatever the GBCs or local authorities say, that temple has that area. But that area may be that only people can come a couple times in a year. That's like your very occasional visits, special visits. So a temple usually is concentrating on this area and this area. And this area here doesn't get covered much. This area is mainly covered by Namahattas. These areas out here are because people, they can't come regular temple. If you want to cover and preach to these people, then the temple needs to organize Namhattas. In fact, even we find that many enthusiastic temples, give me another color. Even in the different areas here, a temple can have small, regular house programs. or namhatas, depending on how responsible the people are. We're not going to discuss so much namhata today as the temple administration of the preaching. But so I'm just giving an introduction into different concepts, so we're talking about the same things. Here we have, I'll put it here as a square, NH, Namhat. Now what happens is that, give me the blue one. The temple can actually have preachers regularly come and even conduct these programs, or have very active congregational members that are really part of the temple structure come, because it's within an hour, 2 or 3 hour drive. They can occasionally go and maintain those programs. I know in Lima, Peru, they have around their temple 6 what they call as namhatas. But actually there's like one preacher that just goes on a route, one Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Everybody to the temple on Saturday or Sunday, or both Saturday, Sunday. So they do like a route. It's like a circuit preacher. That's like one way of doing it. Then of course sometimes you find that there's a place where the people are very responsible and they can maintain on their own a regular program with only occasional visits. Temple still has to visit, but they won't visit every week. They visit maybe once a month or twice a month. So then, if you have namhats further than that, way out here, then it's not possible for the temple to regularly, visit on a daily basis or weekly basis. But again, there may be a namhat preacher who occasionally visits. Obviously someone has to visit, otherwise they won't function. So here we're discussing about it, just to get some basic. These are home programs, namhats that are directly being supported by a temple, and then we have our kind of more autonomous namhats that are distant. These are some of the concepts. So today, especially we want to discuss how does the temple manage all these things? What are the problems? What are the ways that they can engage the congregational members? And rather than me saying more on the topic, since Aniruddha is here from Melbourne, he's going to give us I think I'd like to ask him to come and take over. This is he can correct me, maybe it's not a very fully complete concept, but I just give a basic idea of the kinds of programs. So in addition to this, there's another little program. Let's see, got another color there? Wow, so many colors. Is like these home programs, this is called, you have many homes that are actually very very devout. They're like devotees. They are devotees, but they're regular, doing a regular program. And these are called by Bhaktivinoda Thakur as Shraddha Kutis, homes of faith. It's a basic unit. If you can get one family that's doing their whole devotional practices around your temple, as many of those as you can get, that's a tremendous strength. Those are your top cream congregational members. And some may have occasional house programs, or they may have regular house programs, or they may just come to the other people's, but they're also homes which are actually fully Krishna conscious. They have their Mangal Arati, if they're too far away from the temple to go, or maybe on weekends they go to the temple for Mangalarti. So these are the different kinds of things that in our congregational preaching we want to establish: the Shraddha Kutis, or homes of faith, having different house programs in the temple. Then when you have a strong group, set it up as a more formal structure as a Namahata.
The reason why I ask that is because, you know, sometimes devotees need a little encouragement or a little introduction to the potential of Namhat and congregational development, preaching, because they're not totally aware of the benefits or the results that can actually accrue to a temple if they systematically engage in this type of a program. There are many areas that we can benefit from involving the congregation in Krishna conscious activities. First of all, we can solve problems like manpower shortages. Currently at the moment in Melbourne Temple, on Sunday we've got 3 major preaching projects taking place. This is a good example. Of course, we've got Gaura Purnima, which is, you know, our 2nd biggest festival or 3rd biggest festival of the year. It also so happens, because it's autumn in Australia, it's festival time in our city. So the local mayor has his Mayor's Day. It just happens to fall on Sunday. And we've been going to that for the last 5 years. Along with that, we also have one of our biggest catering events. It's called the Rainbow Festival. They also chose that the Sunday the 27th of March would be a good day to have the Rainbow Festival. So that left us with devotees going to India, 3 big festivals, and how are we going to run it all? Now, because we have developed our congregation, all of the temple devotees, they're going out on the preaching programs, and all our congregational members, our Nam Hut members, and those devotees who are regularly attending the house programs, they're staying back in. We've got 8 of our best Nam Hut devotees. They're staying back in the kitchen with Korma, and they'll be cooking the feast for the Gaura Purnima festival, while all the other devotees are out preaching. And the Sankirtan devotees are here in Mayapur celebrating Gaura Purnima here and going on the parikrama. In fact, one of our Sankirtan devotees, Atul Krishna Prabhu, he said to me, wouldn't it be good if we could have the whole temple come on the Navadvip Mandal parikrama? He said this would be a wonderful opportunity for all of us just to get together, perform some austerities together, and it would, you know, really unite us all as a team. Because I've been encouraging him to think of the temple as a team. And I said, yes, well, in order for us to do that, what we're going to have to do is cultivate the Nam Hut people, cultivate the congregation. Then what we can do is they can have a holiday and come and stay in the temple for a couple of weeks and do all the services in the temple, and we can all come to Mayapur and go on the Navadvip Mandal Parikrama. So that's not unrealistic, actually. That's quite possible if you cultivate your members nicely. It's quite possible that all of the devotees in the temple, or a good percentage of them, can have a holiday here in Mayapur and get totally infused and refreshed to go back out and preach. And also the Nam Hut members, because they've been cultivated nicely, they'll come and do services in the temple, and for them that's a holiday. Just like there was one lady who obviously is a member, she'd just come to visit Mayapur, and she was talking to one of the sannyasis, and she was saying, Maharaj, please give me some service. And this is one of the qualifications of a devotee, is they always like to do some service. And especially, you know, we're doing service all of the time, so sometimes we don't mind a break. But often our congregation, they're looking forward to the opportunity to come to the temple and just do some service. So, very important that we cultivate all of these people nicely. Now, another important factor that has to be taken into consideration is that also these people will be preachers. It's not that we just have to preach to them. But in due course of time, if they're becoming Krishna conscious, then one of the characteristics of a person who's becoming Krishna conscious is that they like to tell others about it. They like to preach, in other words. So one of our most effective methods of preaching is book distribution. So we're seeing, especially in the Prabhupada Marathon at Christmas time, we're seeing wonderful results coming from those temples where they've cultivated their members to the point where they're becoming very Krishna conscious, and they're advancing, and they have a strong desire to preach. So they're taking up the book distribution marathon spirit, and they're also going out and distributing books, or they're purchasing books. So we can also enlist them for book distribution. And then another thing is, well, one of the two most important things in managing a temple, most managers know, is manpower is one thing and money is the other. These are the two major sources of anxiety for any temple manager. So what we're finding is with those congregations that have been cultivated in a very systematic way, then the temples are getting very strong financial support from members who are being looked after and cultivated very, very nicely. And it's very important that the temple, or certainly a department within the temple, is focused wholly and solely on looking after all of these people. I guess one of the best things I can do is give you an example of some of the things that we've done in Melbourne, because it's starting to prove successful. Our goal is, by 1996, for the Prabhupada Centennial, what we would like to do as an offering to Srila Prabhupada is have our temple wholly and solely supported by the funds that are given to us or raised from our congregational members. And we've managed to reduce our weekly overhead. We have a weekly overhead of around about $8,000. And we've managed to reduce the amount that's needed to be collected by the collectors from 6,200 down to 5,200. And one of the main reasons, that's per week. The collectors have to collect now $1,000 less per week than they did a year ago. And that's mainly because we've managed to get that extra $1,000 from our congregational members. Partly our congregational members. Also, another thing that we're doing is increasing our events catering. We're doing more catering events, so, which is another way of raising funds, but that's not our main topic. So by looking after the members very, very nicely, looking after their needs, one will find that they are very eager to reciprocate with us. The thing is, though, we have to give them Krishna consciousness. We have to be prepared to give them the types of things that they're looking for. They're basically looking for association of the devotees. They're looking for some regular contact through a newsletter or a letter. It doesn't have to be very fancy, but if you're sending them something, even if it's just a double-sided A4, normal sheet of paper with, say, a list of the major events, the fast days, the festivals that will be held in the temple, and just some information about what's happening in the temple. It doesn't have to be very much. If you're giving people this on a regular basis, say once a month or once every 2 months, these are the kind of things that keep them connected to us. And it's the kind of thing that they're looking for. Of course, if your temple is quite well organised and it's a big temple, then you can consider doing things like, if you've got an annual giving program with the people that are supporting you, then you can send them a Back to Godhead magazine, or you can send them ISKCON World Review or something a little more substantial. But in any case, we have to make sure that we keep a regular connection with those people. If it's not personal visits, then, and especially when you're dealing with people out here in this area here, you may not be able to contact them regularly. And so therefore it's imperative that we have some publication that we send to these people that we can only visit occasionally. That was one of my, when I started preaching with the congregation probably 11 years ago, and I was selling full sets to people. This is how I started. I was in the full set contract sales program in Australia. And one of my biggest dilemmas was I was selling so many sets of books to people I began to realise that it was impossible for me to actually go and visit all of these people on a regular basis and help them all individually. So it was then that I decided, well, we have to do a newsletter. So I think this is very important. We have to make sure, in order to keep contact with people, that we're sending them some information about the temple, and as much as possible we're arranging either that we visit them personally ourselves, or that we have other devotees in the temple who are actively going out and preaching. Now in Melbourne Temple we have about 10 to 15 regular house programs. I'm not sure whether any of our groups have actually expanded to the point of reaching a Naam Hut, what we would call a fully fledged Naam Hut program. But any one night of the week, Monday to Friday, even on Saturdays also, we'll have a house program taking place, and sometimes 2 or 3 house programs taking place any night of the week in an area probably within an hour of the temple, actually. Not so many in the 2 to 3 to 4 hours distance. So it's important that we're visiting people and cultivating them through this personal program. And you may not be able to do it yourself, but it's beneficial to make sure that you've got all of these, that you've got devotees in your temple regularly visiting these people, because that regular contact with them eventually turns those people into devotees like you and I. One of my first experiences was, and I was dealing predominantly with the Indian congregation in Melbourne, was that, well, I was wondering, what in heck am I doing here? We were having a kirtan and then a Bhagavad Gita class, and we were doing it for 6 months, a year almost, and I was wondering, what's going on here? I'm spending all of this time visiting these people. I have a kirtan, I give a class, we encourage them to take to Krishna consciousness, they cook a meal for us, and then we take prasadam and we sit around and make friends with people, but nobody seems to be doing anything. Nobody's really making any advancement. So I was wondering, what's the point of all of this? But gradually, as we persevered, we began to notice that 1 or 2 or 3 people started to get more serious, and then they started to chant japa a couple of rounds a day, 6 rounds a day, 8 rounds a day, then eventually they started chanting 16 rounds a day. And then, lo and behold, after 2 or 3 years, we finally had 4 or 5 devotees who were ready for initiation. And then after another year or 2, they took second initiation. And then, of course, now we have them regularly serving in the temple, cooking for the deities, doing puja for the deities. Now we find actually those devotees are now going out, they're visiting people, and they have each got their own group of 20 or 30 people in different places, and they're going through the same situation that I was, where they're building up a group of people who are just interested, and they're gradually bringing them up to the point where they're starting to chant rounds, becoming vegetarian, some of them, and they're starting to repeat the cycle again. So I guess one of the things that's required is perseverance and patience and a certain amount of faith that the process of Krishna consciousness is very potent. And in a very short time, if you're regularly visiting people, then it's just a matter of being patient and determined, because those people in due course of time will become devotees. It may not be apparent at this point in time, but gradually, it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if you get some sand, dry sand, and you have big rocks in it, if you shake it, and what happens is the big rocks will float to the top of the surface of the sand. I don't know if you've ever seen that. So it's sort of like sifting like that. You just have to keep doing it, and then gradually those people who have stronger faith, they'll gradually take to the process. They'll keep chanting and regularly visiting people and having a team of devotees. First of all, you may start off with only one devotee doing this program, but I think, especially for those of you who are temple managers, I would suggest you be prepared to put some manpower and money into this program. Very important. Otherwise, you won't get the results that you're capable of achieving. It's very important. We have a somewhat developed management structure in our temple, and so we have 8, 9 departments. You know, there's the cooking department, there's the deity worship department. We have 2 restaurants, so they both have a representative on our council. We have a life member representative. We have brahmachari representative. We have representative for the women. We have a maintenance man who also is a representative on our management committee, and vice president, me, the temple president. Not all of the devotees are convinced that we should put lots of money into congregational development, or are they convinced that we should have lots of manpower working in that area either. And so therefore there's always a little bit of a battle. But we're lucky because we're getting income. We analysed our income last year. We received approximately $75,000 gifts given to us from different campaigns from our members. We spent approximately $35,000. So we calculated for every $1 that we spent on our congregational development program, we got $2 back. So we can argue quite convincingly that we should have more money, say, spent on computers, more money on office facilities, more money spent on, you know, a decent chair for them to sit in their office and have a decent desk. And, you know, you need a certain amount of facility in order to do this kind of program, because it means, for one, keeping track of all the people's names and addresses, telephone numbers, what the names of their children are, what jobs they do, what skills they have, what services they like to perform. All of this information should try and keep as much as possible, especially if you're in a situation where you can use a computer database, keep all of that information, and also keep track of how much money they're giving and how regularly they give it and so forth. If you can keep track of all of that information, it's imperative to then further increase our service to these devotees. See, if we know, the more we know about these people, the more personal dealings we have with them, the more we find out about them, and the more we keep track of that information and then use it to our advantage, the more we can understand the needs of our congregation, and the better then we are to serve them. Ultimately, it's our business is to serve them. So for those of you who are managers amongst us, I would suggest don't hesitate in spending a little bit extra on providing a good facility for your congregational development program or for your Nam Hut preaching program, because you'll get that money back in the short to mid term. And it's better in one sense than... It's confirmed. It's better in one sense than a Sankirtan devotee. What we traditionally in ISKCON classify as a Sankirtan devotee, because what you'll find is, or what we've found is that traditionally a Sankirtan devotee has a life of, say, 4 to 5 to 6 or 7 or 8 years. There are some rare souls who are able to go out and distribute books, you know, for the rest of their life. But not everybody's able to do that. They generally have to go off, they generally have to do some other type of service, or they get married or whatever, they move into the household at ashram, but they're not able to maintain their commitment to serving the temple. Whereas what we find is with the Nam Hut people in there, they're already settled, they're married, they've got their jobs, they're not having, you know, big crises in their life, they're basically settled people, and so their contribution and commitment to preaching Krishna consciousness and supporting the temple is long-term. It's only small, maybe, but it's long-term small. And if you cultivate many, many, many of these long-term people who contribute just a small amount, that eventually adds up into a large amount, but it's steady, and it continues on and on and on, so long as we have a good team. And that's why I'm encouraging the managers to consider, you know, supporting this kind of a program. And also, I would also encourage the devotees to support this kind of a program, because another thing that is required is consistency. there were some figures on our conference, ISKCON Foundation conference, where one of the devotees in Bhaktivedanta Manor, his name is Shruti Dharma. Shruti Dharma, or was it Shruti Dara? Must be Shruti Dara. Yeah. Shruti Dharma, is it? All right. Oh, Shruti Dharma, yeah. He was explaining how he'd worked with the congregation for the last 8 years, is that right? Yeah, last 8 years. In the book distribution marathon, I think it was 28 devotees. Do you remember these figures? 28 devotees collected 78,000 pounds and distributed so many books. Then the devotees who were working with the congregation, with the Indian community, there was something like 9 of those devotees. They collected 78,000 pounds. No, sorry. The Sankirtan devotees who were distributing books collected 90,000, and the devotees who were collecting with the members was 78,000, and they only had a smaller number of devotees collecting. Now he said basically that was because he'd been working with this congregation for the last 8 years, and he said the main thing there was consistency. That he'd been working, and the other members of his team had been working with the devotees, with their congregation for such a long period of time that they were able to get such good results. They were only 12,000 pounds less than the other 28 devotees who've been going out distributing books on the street. So the other thing is, I would request, beg, implore, plead with any devotee who considered working in this area, please stay in your temple. Stay in the temple that you're in at the moment. Don't go anywhere else, and just work on this one program. In fact, make it your life program. Don't think about doing anything else, because you'll be able to do all the other activities, distribute books, raise funds for the temple, build up the manpower for the temple. You'll be able to do all of those things just by working in this one area. But what it requires is consistency. I know I've had that experience myself. I've been in the same temple ever since I joined. I've been there for the last 15 years. And one of the things that I've noticed is that that a certain potency is given to you just by the fact that you've known somebody for 10 or 15 years. They trust you. They like you. They know that you're going to be there next week. And so therefore, I find people sometimes, they'll walk up to me and they say, Haribol, Aniruddha Prabhu, nice to see you. Look, I'd like to give you a donation. And then they just give you a $3,000 check because it's Christmas time or something. And because I've been there for so long and I'm their friend and they know me. So consistency is very important. It requires a great deal of dedication and commitment to being successful in this type of work. Of course, that's not really very much actually, because we've just visited, was it the place where the deities of Vasudev Datta? I can't remember the name of the place, but there's one pujari there he's 80 years old and who's been serving the deity for the last 76 years or so. Champahati. Yeah.
At the age of 16 he started worshipping and he's still there.
Yeah, he's 84. He started worshipping the deity when he was 16. So there's real commitment. That's the kind of a commitment that we should aspire to in serving in this kind of preaching work, because that's the kind of commitment that gets good results in the long term. So you need to be regularly following up on people. You need to have a good team of devotees. You have to be prepared to put time and effort into doing it. And you have to be prepared to work consistently. Now, it starts to get a little problematic when you get large quantities of people to deal with, and it starts to get a little problematic when you've got a team of devotees in your temple working together, because that then requires more cooperation and more commitment. One of the things that we've discovered is, or I've discovered, is that having regular meetings with your Namhat group of devotees, Namhat team, is very important. I had a situation where 2 of our devotees weren't working so well together. one would come to me and complain, oh, what's he doing? He's gone off and done that, and he didn't tell me that he was going to do it, and I wanted to do this, and we eventually didn't get whatever it was that we were supposed to be doing done. And then the other one would come to me and say, oh, what's going on here? You know, they haven't handed in the receipts, they haven't given me this, they're not telling me all the information about the people. You know, what's going on? So I had this situation where the sort of like the office staff weren't working very well with the devotees who were going out and preaching. And I was trying to think of a way to solve the problem. Independent of that, I'd been reading some literature on management processes, and I'd been inspired by the work that the GBC had done in relation to dividing up ISKCON into different kshetras and working on what they call mission. So what I started doing with the devotees was every couple of months we would have a workshop where the 4 or 5 or 6 of us would sit down and we would start working on what our mission is. In other words, we'd start thinking about who are we, what are we doing, where do we want to go, how are we going to do it. And I'd get the whiteboard out and I'd write it up on the board. And originally our mission was very simple. It was something like, we will serve our members in the area around Melbourne by helping them engage in Krishna consciousness. That was it. Very simple, nothing very complicated. We got together again 3 or 4 months later. We expanded it a few more sentences. Then in December we got together, we spent a week, 3 hours every morning for a week. We had a meeting and we sat down and we worked out what our mission was. It was more or less what I just said then, but it was expanded. We will use, database system to keep track of all of our members. We will cultivate them through direct mail, through telephone, through personal visits, through solicitations along those lines. Then it was other things. We will recognise anybody's contribution, great or small, is one of our things. So anyway, we spent quite a bit of time and we got an expanded mission. But what I noticed was that after having spent all this time with the devotees working on what it was that we were actually doing and how we were going to do it, and working through a few campaigns, I noticed that the problems between these two devotees had actually disappeared. And then what I noticed was that the devotees themselves were having meetings without me being there, and they were starting to organise the things amongst themselves. So, especially for a manager, this is very good. Just like you said, you're everything, temple president, whatever else. It's sometimes being a temple president is a very frustrating job, because people expect you to be everything for them. They'll bring every problem that they've got to the temple president thinking that they're going to be able to solve all of their problems. And it's very satisfying when I start to see other devotees walking around with long faces and scratching their brows trying to work out problems, because they're solving a problem that I don't have to solve. But what I noticed was the devotees were having their congregational development meetings, and I was able to go off and give a Chaitanya Charitamrita class, and that was a lot more satisfying for me. And it also meant that it was better for the other Sankirtan devotees, because we were having programs together in another way. So I would recommend for the managers, if you can work in this way with your team of devotees and somehow encourage them to take responsibility for the program and start making the decisions for the program and develop it amongst themselves. Sometimes as temple presidents we tend to think that we do have to be involved with everything, but it's sometimes better to let other devotees take the responsibility for doing these things. Then eventually you'll get the situation where these people will eventually be involving people to the point where they're coming from outside into our system, and then in that way we're actually gradually developing a sense of responsibility, even not only in the devotees in the temple, but gradually shifting the responsibility of seeing that all of these programs go on out into these areas where the congregation lie. Because originally we were all congregation, actually, when you think about it. You and I were all at one time just a member of the congregation. Somehow or other, by cultivation, we came a little bit more responsible. So similarly, if we work with the same consciousness of bringing up the congregation and letting other people take responsibility for seeing that these programs take place. Of course, you have to do it with those people who are capable of taking responsibility, and eventually we'll be shifting the burden of responsibility of preaching Krishna consciousness further and further out into the field. So that eventually we'll see that people who are running a house program will come to the temple, say, and help out doing services there, but then they'll also be preaching. They may develop into a Naam hut, which is basically running by itself, and then eventually in due course of time, as we were discussing before, they will perhaps be able to develop naturally into having their own temple. As Maharaj mentioned, there are so many churches. I've been thinking, how are we going to build temples all around the place? Then I realised we don't have to build temples because the Christians have already gone before us and they've built all their churches. Now nobody's going to the churches, and so somebody's going to have to use them, and the devotees of the Krishna consciousness movement, as I see it, the logical recipients of all of the work of the Christians will be able to use all of their churches, which are now lying idle. So we don't have to... that set me back about 3 years, I think. Now I think about it. No, it wasn't that bad. But the first thing I did was got a computer and then learn how to use a database. And I created my own database system. Probably took me 6 months. I know at that time I was getting criticised a lot for being behind a computer and not out preaching. But anyway, I figured I need to keep track of all these people. A computer to keep track of all the names and addresses. You need a telephone. Actually, when I first started, I started out of my house, and there wasn't an office for me in the temple, and I was asked to take on the full set distribution program, which is more or less the beginning of the congregational development in Melbourne. And first thing I got was a car. So car is not a bad idea. A desk, a chair, and a telephone. 4 essential items in the West anyway for cultivating a congregation. So you can write those things down: a car, a telephone, a desk, and a chair. Next thing then, what you need is a system for keeping track of people, names and addresses and telephone numbers. You can gradually expand that. A good idea is actually to get on to Priyavrata Prabhu from Gothenburg, I think it is. He's written some software called Friends and Funds. Friends and Funds Raising, I think it's called. No, we don't use it. The reason why we don't use it is because I have a devotee who's worked in this area for many, many years, and he does our newsletters and all of our computer work, and we've got our own custom-built database in Access, and we've developed our own system. We're continually developing our own system in Windows, because we figure that in the future everybody will be using Windows, and Friends and Fundraising is a DOS-based program. But I know that program's good and it's being used by a lot of devotees in ISKCON. See, we've got a resident, we've got an in-house programmer, so we can do basically whatever we want. But for those devotees who haven't got such a big setup, just get that software from him. And that way you can keep track of practically everything: donations, birthdays, the works, pledges, everything, mail-outs, labels. It does everything for anybody who wants to start off a program. Next thing then, if possible, I would suggest doing a regular newsletter. Start off with something really simple. Even this is very sophisticated. This type of format is very sophisticated. I would suggest just the fact that you're getting in touch with people, it just has to be one page like that. This side and that side with some information on it, and get that out to people on a regular basis, and do it regularly. You have to be very disciplined to do it regularly, because that's keeping in contact with people. You need to keep some very simple accounting, a simple ledger. My temple president showed me how to do that. That was basically just have one column for keeping track of details and dates, then another column for income, another column for money going out, petty cash column, and bank deposits column, and then a running balance. And that's good, because then you can show how much you've got coming into your temple president, and you can demonstrate, what you're doing with your money. It's very important that all devotees within ISKCON learn how to keep a simple ledger so that they can account for their activities and account for all of the funds that come in. Srila Prabhupada kept, it's in the Lila Amrita, it describes how Srila Prabhupada kept very, small details, even buying potatoes at the market and, small things. Srila Prabhupada kept track of every paisa, practically speaking, that he spent. So we should all get into the habit of keeping track of our own personal expenses, so that we can then demonstrate to others, what we're doing with the money. We can show we're accountable. And at the same time, you can use that then to analyse the results and see whether you're making a profit or not. They're the basic things that I started with.
How big is the department now? How many people are working on it now?
Well, now I'm sort of, I guess you could say, the overseer, but I don't have very much to do with the hands-on work at all, because there are other departments in the temple that need to be developed also, so I'm concentrating on those. But there's myself, who acts just like a chairman whenever we have meetings, and I have ideas on things. Then there's Vijay Gopikesh Das, who's he's like the membership director. He has a full-time job. He's a disciple of Jayapataka Maharaj, and he's our mainstay, main preacher. He's got a full-time job with Shell, works 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and has 4 or 5 preaching programs a week. Sometimes he collects more than any of the collectors in the temple. Sitaram Lakshman is like our number 2 man. He works full-time at our restaurant, Crossways Restaurant, which distributes about 350 plates of prasadam a day, 5 days a week. He works there 5 to 6 days a week. 5 to 6 hours, 5 days a week. And he also goes out and preaches in the evenings. Then there's Karunanidhi Krishna. He works also, and he does programs. Then we have one man working full-time in the temple. We pay him to just write computer programs and do newsletters. And then we have another Mataji who works in the office, and she basically does mail order. So what's that? There's 6 devotees. 6 devotees working in the department now. I started off more or less by myself about 10, 11 years ago, and now we've got 6 devotees. One working full-time, who's paid by the temple to work full-time. Lisa is lives in the Brahmacharini ashram, so we don't pay her, but she works full-time. And the other devotees work part-time.
We want to thank Aniruddha Das, Temple President from Melbourne, Australia, who's also, for the centennial, taken up the coordination of congregational preaching in Australasia. As you can see, he's enthusiastic for this. And today's topic that he was presenting was temple management of congregational preaching. You see, he's been developing a congregation from his temple, so he's speaking from his own experience. Tomorrow we'll deal with other different topics in the next days. And also we'd like to go review what the centennial plan is for the next year, And I hope that Aniruddha, who was really active in that committee for developing the centennial plan, that he'll be participating, if not every day, at least for that day, I hope every day.